Hi, my name is Eric Ramsey. I'm a pastor in a conservative denomination. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. And I think we need to have a discussion, our whole community, about the depravity of same-sex marriage. It's a very important topic. So many people are feeling the pull of this issue, and I believe we need stronger theology around it. Maybe I can make a few steps in that direction today. Now, before we talk about the depravity of something, we need to understand it at its at its base level, the depravity of sin. Let me suggest at first off that sin is sin not because it was chosen at random by God. Like he pulled a thing out of a hat and is like, well, this is the bad hat, and today we have murder. All right, we'll file murder under the bad stuff. If we look at the Ten Commandments, we cannot imagine the opposite of the Ten Commandments, a thing that says, thou shalt murder on a biweekly basis, thou shalt steal whatever you want. You cannot imagine the opposite of the Ten Commandments as we have it as being anything like good or viable or anything. What this means is that sin is sin because it goes against something. And that something is built into this universe and the basic reality of where we are. It's sin is not a thing chosen at random. And I would suggest that we can fundamentally test what is sin and what is depraved by just watching. All right. Um, you see, depravity works by spreading. We can be identified by the spread of the opposite of flourishing. Now, we've all been in situations where we have felt like things are working such that we have life and are moving towards life, and as Jesus says, have life more abundantly. There is a situation that we all just recognize, well, I am growing, I am becoming something better, and I love it. And we've also probably experienced the opposite, where whatever is good in me is getting crushed out and ruined and destroyed. Now, here's the thing with depravity. Paul talks about it, and he says just a little bit of leaven or yeast goes through the whole bread. And he says you got to take out that sin quickly in the community because it spreads. This, I think, is a characteristic of depravity. Let's just choose something like alcoholism. Now, alcoholism is when somebody starts consuming alcohol at a very unhealthy level, and that becomes probably one of their significant coping mechanisms. But just doing that, it doesn't stay limited to the person. It spreads. It stops being the way that they have a good time, but it starts becoming a way that they survive life. And it starts damaging more and more things. It starts damaging their health. Their liver can't take it. Their neurological functions become heavily impaired over time. It starts really damaging their finances because this is a habit that is not cheap. It starts damaging their finances because of their work, because their work starts to become impaired. Because of that, their coping mechanisms in family becomes impaired. And because of that, their family structures that are meant to nourish and develop children and relationships and develop life, they become impaired. And what we see is that what started off as, I would argue, a sin in an individual just by the way they consumed alcohol starts to spread. It sends out death into more and more areas of life. Hopefully it can be stopped, but if it doesn't, families become damaged at best, maybe destroyed. Businesses become damaged, maybe destroyed. Communities suffer horribly. This depravity that started in one place spreads. If we look at the opposite of depravity, we might call it virtue. And I would argue that virtue also has this characteristic of spreading. That when somebody comes into a community or a group or a family and they start living with a virtue, that virtue tends to lift up other areas. If we just say the virtue of patience, Somebody now doesn't react out of anger. If you look at it from a neurological perspective, when something is frustrating, they don't start thinking like an animal of like, how can I beat it down quickly and get back to a place of comfort? They start calming themselves down and thinking and living with the pain and the discomfort of the moment, but thinking of better solutions. How can I find a solution to my discomfort that doesn't hurt other people, that might foster and create new opportunities? Now, suppose this happens, new opportunities grow, and relationships stop becoming less reactive and more proactive. Unity starts developing in the family or the culture, and then as new solutions and relationships grow, more options are opened, and we get closer to this place of life and living abundantly. This is a beautiful thing, but it starts with one person, but then it spreads. New ideas become available just with that one virtue. And other options become destroyed or ruined just with that one instance of depravity. Now, here is where, if we take this idea of the spreading of virtue and the spreading of depravity, may become very important in how we understand homosexuality and same-sex marriage. Now, if we go to our lives and our experiences and our neighbors, and we start looking at same-sex relationships, and we start seeing an increase of depravity. Here is a person who is living out a homosexual life, and then we start seeing everything around them begin to decay. We can say with a much greater level of certainty, wow, that is evil. But here comes a big question that as Christians, we need to deal with. If we see the supposed sin of homosexuality move to its utter and final destination of marriage, which I would assume is just like the greatest instance of homosexual sin, as many of us think of it, if that is the greatest instance of sin, then we ought to, and we can hypothesize that we will see in that instance the greatest expression of depravity, of things degrading and becoming more and more evil, of things working less and less, of people flourishing less and less and just breaking more and more. But here is, I think, one of the big problems that conservative church needs to, absolutely must take into account. It seems to me that same-sex marriages are not exhibiting the depravity and the decay that we might expect from a casual first reading of Romans chapter 2, where Paul expresses it as something really awful, and as an awfulness that all of his readers would just say, yeah, that's bad. And so the experience of depravity that we have, especially nowadays that it has become legalized, doesn't seem to match the expectation from Romans 2. And we have to deal with this if we are claiming that we serve a rational God with rational commands. Here we go. When we look at same-sex marriages, and if you were to like walk past a house that is where depravity is being exemplified, do we experience fear? If I walk past a drug dealer's house, I fear for my safety. If I walk past a same-sex couple's house, especially when they're married, do I fear for my life? Do I worry that someone will lean out a window and shoot me? Do we expect from the reputation that this culture has developed that they will come out and murder my dog? Do we expect that they will run and grab my money? I think all of these, it seems very unlikely. That is not the reputation that has been developed or that I've experienced. In fact, a study has come out following, I believe, 1,800 same-sex couples, or individuals actually. It's a longitudinal study. They've been doing it for a few years. It came out of University of Washington. And they have found that same-sex married couples are exhibiting a greater sense of satisfaction, health, and financial stability than same-sex married couples um, or single couples. In fact, it seems to be that they're experiencing these things at a greater level than non-married heterosexual people. There's even some suggestions that they're experiencing this at a greater level than heterosexual married couples. Now, I'm not ready to jump at that right yet. The data is still fairly new, but it ought to cause us to really question, why are we not seeing the level of depravity that Romans 2 might expect us to see? We could say that all of this data and research is confounded, that it's not being done in good faith, so to speak, and that the researchers are really just trying to find evidence and they're faking their data. I would suggest there's another possibility that maybe we've misread Romans 2 and we have not understood it correctly, and we need to have something of a humble attitude as we start looking and experiencing the people around us. Food for thought. I am not making any massive claims, but what I am saying is that this discussion needs to take into account the lack of observable depravity that we see, especially in same-sex married couples. May God bless us and give us humility and peace and joy as we take out Jesus' word to the streets and everywhere that it's needed. Be blessed.